just me talking, because it'll get awfully boring if you just listen to me talking. Paul graciously let me share that with you, so thank you, Paul. I'm Mark Hood, and I was a passenger on Flight 1549 that day. I think we've all established that. But there's 155 souls that were on that flight, and there's 155 different stories that took place that day. So what I'm going to share with you guys is my story and how it took place. Okay, and I can't tell my story as I told Paul when he called me, because I've spoken all over the world about this, and some people are very, very pensive about letting individuals share. But this is a story of faith. And I can't share that story if I don't share that faith with you. So I just throw that out front so you'll know what's coming, okay? Now, I need a question. I've got a question for the band up there. Can the person who's the smartest person up there raise their hand? No. Okay, what's your name? That's okay, you can just sit down. So, you can just sit down. So, here's what I need you to do. Can you see me? Okay, if I say something you don't understand and I ask you, check or hold, you got to be honest with me and give me check or hold. Good? Let's practice. Check, hold. Thanks. Okay, now we can progress. So in 2009, when the plane crashed, I was the VP of sales for a Japanese medical device firm. So I traveled about 100,000 miles a year. And, you get lulled into a sense of believing that flying is really just like driving a car, and there's not a whole lot of risk in it, right? I mean, come on. This is the 2000s. It's safe, right? Yeah, that's what I thought. So, do any of you ever fly? Yeah. Does he scare anybody? Yeah, let's be honest. Yeah. So before I always flew, I always thought, what would I do if I was faced with an emergency? Would I really do the right thing? And I always go back to Air Florida Flight 90, which crashed in 1982. And I think of John 15:13. No greater love hath a man that he save his brother, give up his life for his brother. And there was a gentleman on that flight that day named Arlen Williams. He was a 1957 graduate of the Citadel. And when that plane crashed on the 14th Street Bridge, it slid off the bridge, knocked some cars into the water, and 6 people went into the water in the Potomac. Now, it was winter in the Potomac, January 12th. And Arlen went in. Okay. So the helicopters came when they finally came and lowered a life-saving hook into the water. First person they lowered it to was Arlen. Arlen was holding on to the tail of the plane, and he passed it. And he passed it so that someone else could be saved. And he didn't pass it once. He passed it 5 times. And on that 6th return trip, when that hook came from him, he succumbed to the icy waters of the Potomac and passed away. And so I grew up with that, thinking about that when I flew, and that I always made an indelible mark on me, that my prayer became not just, Lord, keep me safe if anything happens, but give me strength so that I can serve you honorably and do the right thing. Get a check up there? Thank you. Okay. So flash forward with me, if you would, about 26 years later to 2009. So on the flight, I was sitting in 2A up front, and I wasn't sitting in first class because I'd purchased that seat, because when I used to travel a lot, my kids were in high school then, and my kids were like, Daddy, that's so cool. You get to travel all the time. You get to sleep in hotels where they have swimming pools. I'm like, yeah. And the places I travel aren't always the nicest, and the pools usually aren't open because there's green scum on them because nobody can swim in. But you're right, it's nice. But I was in first class because I had so many miles, and they just automatically upgraded me. So I didn't pay for a first class seat. And so I had an office in Montvale, New Jersey. And if you look at the map here, you can see that bridge that crosses the Hudson River. So my office was about 15 miles up into Montvale. So I lived in Charlotte, 2 kids in high school, and I flew to New York every week or to the West Coast every week. And that's how I made my living. So that day, I came out of my office to fly home, and it was a Thursday. And when you travel all the time, getting home, man, it's perfect. Because if you can get home, you can relax. But more importantly, I could watch The Dog Whisperer. Has anybody ever seen The Dog Whisperer? I don't even think it's on anymore, but it was a great show. That guy could do miracles with dogs. So I wanted to get home and watch The Dog Whisperer. So I left my office for the 3:30 flight, got in the car that picked me up, and it was snowing. Snows up there all the time. I didn't think anything about it. It's January, it's supposed to. Drove down to LaGuardia, which is number 1 down there. Came through security, made my way to the gate, made my way without paying a whole lot of attention to my ticket to the seat. And I always sit on the aisle because I want to be able to get up and move around if need be. And lo and behold, there's a lady in a full-length meat coat sitting in 2C on the aisle. And it was only at that time I realized I was at the window. Well, that meant she had control. She could keep me from getting in the aisle. And so I didn't like that. But sometimes we don't always get what we want, right? Check. Check. Thank you. Yeah. Okay. We don't always get what we want, right? Yeah. So, I asked the lady very politely, I said, "Ma'am, would you put my briefcase over there?" And she was on her cell phone, and she kind of grumbled up at me and gave me a snarling look. And I thought, oh boy, it's going to be a long flight. So I stowed my case above me, sat down, and we backed away from the gate and got into line to leave. And by that time, she's off her telephone. She's a little nicer. And we start to have a conversation. We don't agree on anything. We're polar opposites on politics, but I can get along with that. Not everybody believes like I do. Then she says the unforgivable, Paul. She hates sports. I'm like, then what are we going to talk about? So then she looks at me, and she's leaning over me, looking out the window, and she says, "We're never going to get out of here. We're never going to take off on time." And I said, "I'll bet you $5 we make it." And we did. We got in line and we took off. And as you can see from the line here, we took off roughly to the northwest. And as we're ascending, where that first little number 2 is, we've been in the air about a minute and a half, 2 minutes. I just happened to glance out my window, and I happened to see what looks like a mop fly by the window. And then all of a sudden, just boom! Now it hits hard. And again, you got to pay a lot of close attention to this checker hold up there. Now, having gone to the Citadel, that makes us pretty what? That's right, smart, thank you. So I was smart enough to understand that there wasn't a good sign, feeling something hit the plane. And then I looked out the window and I could hear this sound, and it was like boom, 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 like tennis shoes in the washing machine. And I looked out the window and there were flames coming out the engine. I'm like, man, I guess we'll get turned around and head on back. And then all of a sudden, the lady beside me looks over and she goes, "Oh my God, what is that?" I said, "Don't worry." I said, "I fly about 100,000 miles a year. We'll be fine. Pilot will turn around and get us back to LaGuardia." Excuse me. And about that time, as soon as I said that, complete silence. The engine quit on the left side and the engine quit on the right side. Now I began to look out that window, and everything started to get lower. The buildings started to get lower, and all you could hear was the whoosh. And I started to say my prayers. And I started to pray. I reached over and I grabbed the hand of that lady who'd been so crabby next to me. And I looked at her and I said, "We're going to crash." And I held on to her hand. And I started to pray for her. I started to pray for the captain who was flying it, the flight attendants and the other passengers. And then, I said, listen, Lord, about that time in 6th grade, I need to confess that. And, I'm running things down. And finally, I get to my family, and I'm like, Lord, listen, my son's about the age I was when I lost my brother. I said, let him get through this. I said, and my daughter, she's coming to school in New York in 2 years, let her get through this. I said, and my wife, let her find happiness with another man who's not near as good looking as I am. And so, at the end of that prayer, I expected the next time I had a conversation with the Lord to be face to face. So, we're starting to lose altitude. And as you can see, that bridge, which crosses the Hudson River, that's the George Washington Bridge. We crossed it, and we were about 600 feet above it when we crossed it. We lost all thrust, and the captain was barely able to keep the plane under control. Once we cleared that bridge and started to go lower and lower and lower towards the Hudson River, it became obvious we're going to crash in the Hudson River. So I'm still praying, and now, up front, I can hear the computer-generated voice saying, from the cockpit saying, pull up, pull up, pull up. No other sound. So, there was a complete sense of peace on that plane. Now, I share this with you because everyone I speak to about this says, it must have been utter chaos and mayhem. There was a feeling of peace on that plane at that time that I can only describe as from the Lord. There wasn't any screaming, there wasn't any hollering, there were a lot of people crying. And as we descended lower and lower, the flight attendants were up front, and they were looking all around, couldn't see. And Captain Sullenberger came on the loudspeaker and said, brace. That's all he said was brace. So everybody started to go down the brace position, and I sometimes have trouble following rules. And so I said, listen, man, I want to see this. Whatever happens, I want to see it. I'm not going in the brace position. So I started to look out the window. And I'm like, all right, listen, I'm thinking about 2 minutes, I'm stepping in front of you, Lord. And about that time, I heard this voice say, not today, Mark. Now listen, I don't know what you believe, okay? And I'm not here to convert you. All I can tell you is, I'm not a liar. I heard that still, small voice say, not today. And I'm like, oh man, I would have thought that you were going to take me today. I said, come on. I said, I thought you were going to take me in Africa and Liberia during the Civil War. I said, but then I thought you'd take me in Desert Storm, but now you're not going to take me today after you prepared me for this? Not today. And then we hit. We bounced twice and came to rest. Now, the gist of this whole experience is people behaved well. People did the right things. That's why I only stayed in front of the media for a little while. That guy up there standing next to me is Patrick Harton, and he thought he was going to be the last person to ever speak to anyone from that plane when he had radio exchanges with Captain Sullenberger. Now, how many of you have always said, God, if I can just see a miracle, just let me see a miracle. Yeah, that fact we get up every morning and put our feet flat on the ground doesn't count. Ladies and gentlemen, planes aren't supposed to fly without engines. That's a miracle dead ahead of you. Now, this is one of my favorite quotes from The Voice of the Martyrs. Commitment that is unprepared for sacrifice is merely compromise in disguise. Okay, so stay with me on this. So, when we stopped bouncing in the river and we came to rest, like that gentleman on the film said, Steve, people just began to run up the aisle because everybody wanted to get out of the plane then, right? I mean, it's common sense. So the young lady next to me is in the crash position, and she's still in the tuck position, and she's still in the tuck position. I'm like, well, so I tapped her on the back, and she popped up and looked at me, and she says, is this heaven? I said, no. I said, I'm no angel. I said, but we got to go. So helped her out of her seat. She was horribly injured below the waist, black and blue below the waist. There was the gentleman in front of me broke his shoulder, person behind me dislocated their knee. I never felt a thing. But we made it up into the left door. And again, by then, the rescue chutes, the slides, had deployed. And again, it's about a 2-foot drop. And again, my seatmate, as you heard her say, she hesitated. So I helped her out the door, pushed her into the raft. And then I stepped into the raft. And being, those rafts, anytime you see them on television, it looks so perfect. Everybody floats and stands straight up, and it looks like everything works perfect on them. If you weigh about 100 pounds, you won't sink in that raft. But the Lord made me different. I had a little more insulation. So when I stepped into it, I sunk very deep in that raft. And the raft also had a mesh bottom in it. So it was full of water. Now there was ice in the river north of the bridge, and it was still snowing. The air temperature was about 32 degrees, 33 degrees, so it was so cold. And as soon as you stepped into that raft, you started to lose feeling and everything. So the whole time I'm praying, Lord, give me strength. Let me behave honorably. If something happens now, then still let me behave honorably so that other good people can come out of this alive. Because I'd learned in the Marines that bad things can happen after the initial action. And so I started to look around me, and there are people in the water. I'm like, wow, this isn't good. So I started pulling people into the raft. And then the ferries started to get there. Now, ferries arrived, and that's a good thing, right? I mean, come on. Check, that's how we're going to get out of there, right? There's just one problem. Those ferries' decks are 12 feet above the water line. Now think about it. If somebody's been in the water 2 minutes, the water's right at freezing, most people can't feel anything. Most people can't move. People have lost their shoes. People don't have coats. And so when the ferry gets there, the next thing we have to do is we have to ensure how we're going to get people up. So by then, again, like I said, I had weathered the cold better than a lot of folks. I reached in the water and pulled a lot of folks out of the water. And again, I was doing pretty well. A lot of people were suffering from the environment. So when the ferry got there, remember, nobody can feel their feet. Hardly any of us can feel our hands or our arms up to our shoulders. We made a human chain. And we started pulling people out of the raft and getting them up onto the deck of the ferry. So again, I share with you that message that people were prepared to commit to do the right thing. Once we got everybody out of the raft, everybody's up and onto the decks of the ferry. And again, you can't choreograph this. I look around, and there's 3 people left in the raft. There's this guy in a captain's hat with his tie on, buttoned in. That's Captain Sullenberger. There's Jeff Skiles, the co-pilot, and then there's me. And I'm like, wow. And so finally, one of the ferries pulls over, and they open a stern gate door, which is right at the water line. And they pull the raft over there. Well, again, I'm a gentleman. I was raised to do the right thing. Captain Sullenberger's older than I am, so when the door opened, I said, Captain Sullenberger, or I said, sir, you want to step out first? He said, I'll be the last one out of this raft, young man. I said, aye, sir. So we hopped on the ferry and left. This is a guy named Scott Coon. Now, Scott was tending his boat on the New Jersey side of the Hudson River. Jumped in his boat, ran out to the plane, and pulled 5 people out of the water. Again, another example of people doing the right thing. The guy on the left side is a physician named Ray Brassey. He's with the Fire Department of New York. So he went to the ferry terminal on the Manhattan side and started triaging people. People who were going into the hypothermic shock, people who'd broken bones, etc. So he saved a lot of people from going into shock. Now I got to tell you, this lady on the right side, Hilda Gutierrez, she's hardcore. She's a physician also. As soon as she heard about it, she jumped in her car and went to the ferry terminal on the New Jersey side. As soon as she got there, the guy in front of me on the plane was coming out of off the ferry, and he was going into cardiac arrest. He'd broken his sternum and dislocated his shoulder and couldn't talk, and she saved his life. So just selfless sacrifice. She did that for about 3 other people. So I told you I had kids, right? And so I, being smart enough to take my cell phone, I stuck it in the pocket of my shirt. So when I got on the ferry, I'm thinking to myself, wow, I probably ought to call my wife. So my hands were so cold, I couldn't dial my cell phone. So I hit number last dialed, and it's one of my sales managers. And he goes, hey, what's up? I go, dude, you won't believe this. I'm in the middle of the Hudson River. He said, you're right, I don't. I said, I swear. I said, can you call my wife and tell her I'm okay? He said, sure. So he called her, and as it began to thaw out, I eventually was able to call her, tell her I was okay. And she said, listen, that's fine. I'm happy you're okay. I love you. But you know, you have 2 children in the car that are 16 that are driving right now. I said, that's all right. She said, Mark, do you know how dangerous our daughter is? I said, well, do you know how dangerous our son is in a car? So she said, well, you got to call him. So fortunately, I was able to catch my daughter before she got in the car. I said, honey, I was just in a plane crash, but I'm okay. She goes, oh, daddy, oh, daddy, are you okay? Oh, I said, honey, I'm fine. So, please, daddy, when will we be home? I said, I'll be home tonight. Everything's good. Okay, I said, I love you. Call my son. I said, son. He said, hey, daddy. I said, how you doing? He said, good. Mama said you were in a plane crash. I said, yeah, I was. He said, you okay? I said, yeah, I'm fine. All right, Daddy, I love you. Have a good day. I'm like, difference in boys and girls. So, these are my new friends. That's Denise on the left side, the woman who was kind of crabby, that was my seatmate. So she doesn't have any family left alive in the world except her sister. And she and her sister live about 2 miles from me in Charlotte, and they're with us every Thanksgiving and Christmas, every family celebration. And then the guy on the right is a guy named Steve O'Brien. I think you heard me in the intro talk about Steve trying to swim to Manhattan. So he's about 6'4", 260 pounds, and when he finally got to the raft, I could barely pull him in. And but we got him in the raft, but we've become very close as well. This is how Rex Rabin at the Sacramento Bee saw it. He drew that and put it in the paper the next day. And again, I don't think he even knew what he was drawing, because he said he wasn't a believer. But you can interpret that any way you want to. Got home. Now that night, I knew I was going to miss the dog whisperer, but I still wanted to come home anyway and see the family. So I got U.S. Airways to rebook me that night at 10:30 and got home about 1 o'clock at night, reunited with the family. And then the most amazing thing happened. So when I was at the airport at LaGuardia waiting for my flight at 10:30, this scruffy old guy walks up to me and goes, did you hear about that plane crash? I said, yeah, I did. I said, as a matter of fact, I was on it. He said, really? He said, what happened? I said, well, man, the hand of God was on that plane. I didn't know who he was. He starts writing, and he pulls out a tape recorder. I said, who are you? And he was a reporter for the Charlotte Observer. So he sent the story back, and they put it in the paper the next morning. So I'm laying in the bed about 6:30 in the morning, and all of a sudden, the phone starts ringing. And my wife answers it. It's all these radio stations out in California, Atlanta. All these people want to start talking to me. I'm like, wow, okay. Listen, I'm happy to talk to anybody because the hand of God was on that plane. So about 8 o'clock, I jump on a call with the radio station, and the guy goes, we got Mark Hood here, who was on the flight that crashed in the Hudson River last night. And he said, hey, Mark, what you got to say? I said, man, the hand of God was on that plane last night. And he said, we're going to go to a commercial. I'm like, well, holy smokes. And my wife's sitting there, and she's looking at him. I go, man, what's up? He goes, yeah, you need to keep that religious stuff down. I said, why? He said, because we're not really that kind of radio station. I said, well, then I'm not really your kind of interview, brother. I said, I appreciate it. I said, but I can't talk about it any other way. So from that point on, my wife screened everybody and said, he's going to say these words like Jesus, God, heaven, and the power of God, and the hand of God. So if y'all aren't comfortable with that, he's not your guy. There's 154 other people to talk to. And fortunately, most everybody did. They let me speak, and even CBS Evening News was good about it. I mean, the papers were, so it was just a great opportunity to share. So, this is my favorite, y'all. Hebrews 11:1, now faith is being sure of what we hope for and certain of what we cannot see. You know, there was a lot went on that day, but the bottom line was you got to keep that faith and know it's at the end, because every one of us sitting in this room has one thing in common, and I don't know most of y'all's names. None of y'all know me. When you leave here, it really doesn't matter if you remember who I am or what happened to me, because that's not really why I'm here. Every one of y'all gonna die one day. Me too. And all I can say is, had that whole day changed and been different, I would have gone to heaven. And again, I'm not here to convert you. This is the only way I can finish this up, because this is the most important part. If you don't know that piece, then you need to have a conversation with somebody who does and explore that opportunity, because that's really the only thing that I say here today that's worth listening to. Know where you're going. I'll finish with, I'm not trying to scare you, because this is celebratory, and I really thank y'all for your attention. Anybody that let me come and speak with them like this, and let somebody like Paul, who's such a respectful person, say so many nice things about me, I'll take that every day of the week, and I really appreciate your time. And that's all I got to say. If there's any questions, anybody that wants to ask anything, feel free. Feel free to ask away. If there's something I said that isn't clear, or any questions. Great. Yes, ma'am. Well, thank you, ma'am. Thank you. Right back at you. Anybody else? Very good. Thank you again.